Good morning. We're going to continue reading our Holes novel this morning. The first thing that we're going to do before we begin reading chapter 24 is a review of what's happened so far in the novel. We're introduced to the main character Stanley as he arrives at Camp Green Lake, and we learn a little bit about him and his family. We're also introduced quite early in the novel to some of the staff at Camp Green Lake and some of the campers. We also find out a little bit about what Stanley's life was like at school, and we find out about the day that Stanley got in trouble with the law. Once at Camp Green Lake, he figures out that he has to dig holes. He's not sure what the hole digging is about, but he does figure out, or he knows that he's looking for something interesting. Not sure what that interesting thing is. He figures out that fossils are not an interesting find. We learn a little about the history of Stanley's family and how they ended up in the United States. We're introduced to Stanley's great-great-grandfather and how he caused a curse to be cast on his family. Stanley gets a nickname quite early in his days at Camp Green Lake. And his new nickname, or his nickname, is Caveman. So he's known as Caveman throughout the novel. Stanley does find a tube one day when he's digging, and he's convinced though to give that tube to another camper. He gives it to X-Ray, and then the warden thinks that this was an interesting thing to find, so then the hole digging moves to the area where X-Ray found the tube. So then we find out that Zero, another camper, can't read or write. And he does ask Stanley to help him learn. Stanley says no. One day while they were out digging holes, one of the campers' magnets steals a sack of sunflower seeds from Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir is not impressed and takes Stanley to the warden, because Stanley has the bag of seeds when Mr. Sir comes looking for them. So Stanley takes the blame for stealing the sunflower seeds. The warden, though, not impressed. She doesn't care about Mr. Sir's problem with the sunflower seeds, and she expresses her displeasure by scratching Mr. Sir with her special nail polish. While he was gone, Zero helped dig Stanley's hole, and the result of that was Stanley agreed to help teach Zero to read and write. While Stanley is reflecting in bed one night, he thinks he remembers where he's seen a tube like this before, and he thinks that it's possibly from his a tube that would be on lipstick. So he wonders then, I wonder if this belongs to Kissin' Kate Barlow, the outlaw. And then the final chapter that we read just before our Easter break was an introduction to Catherine Barlow, who was a teacher in the town. So now we're going to start at chapter 4 and see what happens here. Chapter 24, sorry. All right. Stanley was half asleep as he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of half a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running down his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice and a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eyes down and hardly breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray to the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Sir holding the boy's head against the oatmeal pot. "Is something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak, but couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" asked Mr. Sir as he continued to choke the boy. Nobody said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. His head banged against the table as he fell to the ground. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, "How does my face look to you now?" A gurgling sound came out of the boy's mouth. Then he managed to gasp the word, "Fine." "I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he just shrugged and dug his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard and as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. "Whenever you're ready, just let me know," Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except, "Thank you, Mr. Sir," as he filled each canteen. No one even dared to look at his grotesque face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry and as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected off the side mirror of the truck, and Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet as he took his canteen from him. "You thirsty, caveman?" Mr. Sir asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said, handing him his canteen. Mr. Sir opened the nozzle and the water flowed out of the tank, but it did not go into Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds, then stopped. "You want more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour onto the dirt. "There, that should be plenty." He handed Stanley his empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," he said. So, now, the activity that you have to do, a couple of things. Draw a picture of Mr. Sir's face. And try to be as realistic as you possibly can. Your picture should cover about half of a page. And then the second thing that you have to do for this chapter, for chapter 24, is to draw a cartoon of the final scene of this chapter. So a cartoon of Mr. Sir not giving Stanley water when he comes with the water truck. So try to have 2 or 3 sections to your cartoon. Then you can, while you're doing that, you can pause the video and then we'll come back and continue. We'll read chapter 25. And chapter 25 starts on page 47 of your PDF. Okay, chapter 25. Beginning on page 47 of your PDF, and you can follow along on your PDF or you can listen. It's up to you. There was a doctor in the town of Green Lake 110 years ago. His name was Dr. Hawthorne. And whenever people got sick, they would go see Doc Hawthorne. But they would also see Sam, the onion man. "Onions, sweet fresh onions," Sam would call as he and his donkey Mary Lou walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and another day for him to return. Most of the time he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use at no charge, but sometimes he would take Mary Lou on his boat with him. Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. "She eats nothing but raw onions," Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. "It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old." Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would he know? Still, nobody ever argued with Sam. And whenever they were sick, they would not only go to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave the same advice: eat plenty of onions. He said that onions were good for the digestion, the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, and the brain. If you don't believe me, just look at old Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also had many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and pastes, all made out of onion juice and different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma, that one was for warts and pimples, another was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment which he claimed would cure baldness. "Just rub it on your husband's head every night when he's sleeping, Mrs. Collingwood, and soon his hair will be as thick and as long as Mary Lou's tail." Doc Hawthorne did not resent Sam. The folks of Green Lake were afraid to take chances. They would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. After they got over their illnesses, no one could be sure, not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost completely bald, and in the morning his head often smelled like onions, so he was probably using Sam's concoctions as well. Whenever Catherine Barlow bought onions, she always bought an extra one or two and would let Mary Lou eat them out of her hand. "Is something wrong?" Sam asked her one day as she was feeding Mary Lou. "You seem distracted." "Oh, just the weather," said Miss Catherine. "It looks like rain clouds moving in." "Me and Mary Lou, we like the rain," said Sam. "Oh, I like it fine," said Miss Catherine, as she rubbed the donkey's rough hair on top of his head. "It's just that the roof leaks in the schoolhouse." "I can fix that," said Sam. "What are you going to do?" Catherine joked. "Fill the holes with onion paste?" Sam laughed. "I'm good with my hands," he told her. "I built my own boat. If it leaked, I'd be in big trouble." Catherine couldn't help but notice his strong, firm hands. They made a deal. He agreed to fix the leaky roof in exchange for 6 jars of spiced peaches. It took Sam a week to fix the roof because he could only work in the afternoons, after school let out and before night classes began. Sam wasn't allowed to attend classes because he was a Negro, but they let him fix the building. Miss Catherine usually stayed in the schoolhouse grading papers and such while Sam worked on the roof. She enjoyed what little conversation they were able to have, shouting up and down to each other. She was surprised by his interest in poetry. When he took a break, she would sometimes read a poem to him. On more than one occasion, she would start to read a poem by Poe or Longfellow, only to hear him finish it for her from memory. She was sad when the roof was finished. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No, you did a wonderful job," she said. "It's just that the windows won't open." "The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then." "I can fix that," said Sam. She gave him 2 more jars of peaches, and Sam fixed the windows. It was easier to talk to him when he was working on the windows. He told her about his secret onion field on the other side of the lake, where the onions grow all year round, where the water runs uphill. When the windows were fixed, she complained that the desk wobbled. "I can fix that," said Sam. The next time she saw him, she mentioned that the door doesn't hang straight, and she got to spend another afternoon with him while he fixed the door. By the end of the first semester, Onion Sam had turned the old run-down schoolhouse into a well-crafted, freshly painted jewel of a building that the whole town was proud of. People passing by would stop and admire it. "That's our schoolhouse. It shows how much we value education here in Green Lake." The only person who wasn't happy with it was Miss Catherine. She'd run out of things needing to be fixed. She sat at her desk one afternoon, listening to the pitter-patter of the rain on the roof. No water leaked into the classroom, except for the few drops that came from her eyes. "Onions, hot sweet onions," Sam called out on the street. She ran to him. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she hugged Mary Lou's neck. "Something wrong?" he asked her. "Oh, Sam," she said, "my heart is breaking." "I can fix that," said Sam. She turned to him. He took hold of both of her hands and kissed her. Because of the rain, there was nobody else out on the street. Even if there was, Catherine and Sam wouldn't have noticed. They were lost in their own world. At that moment, however, Hattie Parker stepped out of the general store. They didn't see her, but she saw them. She pointed her quivering finger in their direction and whispered, "God will punish you." So, if we think back to when we read the stories about the way Black people were treated in the United States, you should get some idea as to why Sam couldn't go to school with Miss Catherine, and why Hattie Parker would say, "God will punish you." All right, so just think for a minute about some of the clues that were in that chapter that Sam and Catherine liked each other more than Sam just being the worker. And then if you want to pause for a minute, you can, and then I'll begin reading chapter 26, and chapter 26 is on page 49 of your PDF. And as I'm reading this, I want you to think about the conflict that's in this chapter, and this is a different kind of a conflict. So this is conflict man versus society, and it's a struggle with either written rules or the unwritten rules of a society or the customs of a society. So think about Sam or Catherine's conflict here. Chapter 26. There were no telephones, but word spread quickly through the small town. By the end of the day, everyone in Green Lake had heard that the school teacher had kissed the onion picker. Not one child showed up for school the next morning. Miss Catherine sat alone in the classroom and wondered if she had lost track of the day of the week. Perhaps it was Saturday. Wouldn't have surprised her. Her brain and heart had been spinning ever since Sam kissed her. She heard a noise outside the door. Then suddenly a mob of men and women came storming into the school building. They were led by Trout Walker. "There she is," Trout shouted. The devil woman. The mob was turning over desks and ripping down bulletin boards. She's been poisoning your children's brains with books, Trout declared. They began piling all the books in the center of the room. Think about what you are doing, cried Miss Catherine. Someone made a grab for her, tearing her dress, but she managed to get out of the building. She ran to the sheriff's office. The sheriff had his feet up on his desk and was drinking from a bottle of whiskey. Mornin', Miss Catherine, he said. They're destroying the schoolhouse, she said, gasping for breath. They'll burn it to the ground if someone doesn't stop them. Just can't calm your pretty little self down a second, the sheriff said in a slow drawl, and tell me what you're talking about. He got up from his desk and walked over to her. Trout Walker has... Now, don't go saying nothing bad about Trout Walker, said the sheriff. We don't have much time, urged Catherine. You've got to stop them. You're sure pretty, said the sheriff. Miss Catherine stared at him in horror. Kiss me, said the sheriff. She slapped him across the face. He laughed. You kiss the onion picker? Why won't you kiss me? She tried to slap him again, but he caught her by the hand. She tried to wiggle free. You're drunk, she yelled. I always get drunk before a hanging. A hanging? Who? It's against the law for a Negro to kiss a white woman. Well, then you'll have to kiss me too. You'll have to hang me too, said Catherine, because I kissed him back. It ain't against the law for you to kiss him, the sheriff explained, just for him to kiss you. We're all equal under the eyes of God, she declared. The sheriff laughed. Then if Sam and I are equal, why won't you kiss me? He laughed again. I'll make you a deal. One sweet kiss and I won't hang your boyfriend. I'll just run him out of town. Miss Catherine jerked her hand free. As she hurried to the door, she heard the sheriff say, The law will punish Sam, and God will punish you. She stepped back into the street and saw smoke rising from the schoolhouse. She ran down to the lakefront where Sam was hitching Mary Lou to the onion cart. Thank God I found you, she sighed, hugging him. We've got to get out of here, now. What? Someone must have seen us kissing yesterday, she said. They set fire to the schoolhouse. The sheriff said he's going to hang you. Sam hesitated for a moment as if he couldn't quite believe it. He didn't want to believe it. Come on, Mary Lou. We have to leave Mary Lou behind, said Catherine. Sam stared at her a moment. There were tears in his eyes. Okay. Sam's boat was in the water, tied to a tree by a long rope. He untied it and they waded through the water and climbed aboard. His powerful arms rowed them away from the shore. But his powerful arms were no match for Trout Walker's motorized boat. They were little more than halfway across the lake when Miss Catherine heard the loud roar of the engine. Then she saw the ugly black smoke. These are the facts. The Walker boat smashed into Sam's boat. Sam was shot and killed in the water. Catherine Barlow was rescued against her wishes. When they returned to the shore, she saw Mary Lou's body lying on the ground. The donkey had been shot in the head. That all happened 110 years ago. Since then, not one drop of rain has fallen on Green Lake. You make the decision. Who did God punish? 3 days after Sam's death, Miss Catherine shot the sheriff while he was sitting in his chair drinking a cup of coffee. Then she carefully applied a fresh coat of red lipstick and gave him the kiss he had asked for. For the next 20 years, Kissin' Kate Barlow was one of the most feared outlaws in all the West. So that's chapter 26. So now I want you to think about the conflict that Miss Catherine had and describe that conflict. So remember, it's a struggle with the rules of a society. So write down the conflict, and then make an inference. And so remember, an inference is a clue to making a decision based on clues that you've heard about or read about. So what inference can you make about why Camp Green Lake is dry now? So when you're doing that, think about what happened just before it stopped raining.